Hello everyone, welcome to another video. Today I actually want to do something a little different and talk to you guys about fantasy books and stories that I actually really want you all to check out. Not all of these are going to be from Japan, mind you. A lot of these are going to be a mix of stuff that I like from Japan, stuff that I also like from the West, and I'm going to give you guys some recommendations, and all of these stories can be found on Audible or Kindle, and some of these can also be found on Netflix as anime already. But if you want me to talk more about fantasy stuff here on YouTube, please hit the like button, share, tell me in the comments down below, and let's get into it. Right off the bat, let's start with something fun. My Uncle from Another World is a very fun slapstick kind of anime. It's basically the idea of what would happen after the isekai adventure is over and you come back to your own world. The main characters are essentially a uncle who was trapped in the world for about, I believe, 10 years or so, I think. And his nephew was the only person in his family that was willing to help him out when he wakes up. He was originally going to have him sign some papers that send him to the nut house, basically. But after he proves that his magic actually works from the other world, he decides to keep him and they become YouTubers. It's really funny. It's a really fun, playful, just messing around anime where you just kind of watch it for fun. And I will say the animation in the anime is not the greatest thing ever, but because of the funny, like, choppy nature of the animation, I think it actually makes the anime even funnier when it delivers certain jokes. And that's the one thing I think about this anime that's probably the best, is the writing of the jokes. The uncle of the story is also probably my favorite character because it's just how absurd he is. And for those of you that are huge gamers, you're gonna love this a lot, mainly because, well, there's just so many references and jokes to old video games, especially stuff like Sega. That's all in here. You're gonna love it. You're gonna fall in love with it. I highly recommend it. It's on Netflix. It's dubbed entirely, if you guys are interested in that, because I watch things exclusively in dub because, you know, I'm legally blind, so I'm not gonna read subtitles. But yeah, definitely check it out. Next, we're gonna talk about one of the isekai that I didn't expect to be so well written, I guess. JK, Haru becomes a sex worker in another world.
Oh, wait, you serious?
Listen, I know, I've started reading this recently. It's on Kindle, and it's essentially the writer's take on how isekai has turned into a very heavily male-dominated space for the most part. There's a lot of stuff in here that I don't want to get into because it is, funny enough, probably one of the most mature stories we're going to talk about here today. Yes, there is lots of sex. This sex is delivered to you in a very matter-of-fact kind of way. It's not sexy. I'm gonna be honest with you. If you're thinking this is gonna be a fun hentai time, it's not. The story uses sex and the way that women are treated in this world as a vehicle to show you how misogynistic isekai have essentially become and have been allowed to become for a very long time. I'm not gonna get into too many spoilers. If you're interested in the story, please check it out. It's on Kindle. It is very mature, but you do have to get through a lot of kind of gross stuff. There is stuff in here that's gonna make you very uncomfortable. I'm not gonna sugarcoat it. There is stuff here that is very scary, R word, and it is very uncomfortable. Ironically, it's one of the most well-written isekai, which probably not saying much, because isekai for the most part has kind of been going downhill for a while now, but it does take the whole overpowered main character, weeb character that is also in here, by the way, because she dies by Truck Kung with the nerd otaku, and they both get sent to the same world. He gets all the power, she gets nothing. I think the best selling point that I can give you for this book is the main character, Haru, is the most interesting, sarcastic character in this book. She's great. I love her. She's so well written. And I think that the way that she goes about living in this world as basically a prostitute is super interesting because she chooses everything. She chooses to work. She's not forced into it. She chooses to work in this industry. And I think that it helps with delivering certain points that the author's trying to get through. And it's not all 100% well done. There's certain times where I'm just like, that's a little weird, but it is very well written overall, especially if we're comparing it to other isekais. And if you can get through the weird, uncomfortable parts, you should definitely check out Haru is a sex worker in another world. God damn it. And now we're going to move away from some Japanese stuff, and we're going to go into some stuff that I want you guys to check out here in the West. This is on Audible and Kindle, and I highly recommend it. It is called the First Law Trilogy. These books, starting with the blade itself, are a really fun adventure that is very grounded. If you're used to very high fantasy stuff with like overpowered magic, people doing crazy crap, this is a lot more grounded in that. These characters are also, they're gross. They're bad people. Like a lot of the people in here to an extent are kind of good people, but can also be really bad people. They're all very gray. Starting off with Logan Ninefingers, who is basically the protagonist of the book. He is a Norseman who has had a very bad past. However, he is trying to become better and help people out more now. He still slips into his bad tendencies, and sometimes will go on a murderous rampage.
You what?
There are two other main characters in the story. Glockter, who is a crippled ex-soldier now turned into a man who basically tortures for a living, unleashing the horrible things that's happened to him on others. He is the most gray character in this book, but he's also the most interesting. He deals with the politics of this world a lot, while also being a cripple who is made fun of and treated poorly because he's a cripple. But he is so morally gray that it fucking hurts. And the third main character is Giselle Dan Luther, who is a nobleman. Yeah, Luther is a cunt. Luther is probably my favorite character in this book, mainly because of just how incredibly stupid he is. But he tries so hard to be a better person, but he's so goddamn dumb. And honestly, he's kind of racist. But he does get better as the story goes on, and he starts to respect other people. Eventually, Luther and Logan get placed into a single party and get sent on a giant adventure. This adventure is actually a lot of fun, and watching them have to interact with each other is also just fantastic. Their entire party consists of a girl who is basically a quarter demon, a wizard who's a douchebag, their navigator, who will not shut the fuck up. The story also has a lot of different POVs from a lot of different characters throughout the entire world, and they all eventually do connect very well to each other. And watching characters going from point A to point B to eventually meet each other is really, really interesting. These books are pretty big fat boys, and you might need to give them some decent amount of commitment though. And also, before I finish talking about this book specifically, I will say that everything after the third book kind of goes downhill for me. I don't know why, but the end of the third book kind of leaves me with a bad taste in my mouth. The trilogy that comes after the First Law books are essentially kind of a soft reboot, because there's such a huge time skip that none of the main protagonists from the main book really impact the new books, and you're essentially starting out from the beginning. Yes, there are some characters from the original trilogy in here, but they're not huge game-changing characters in the new trilogy. So if you stop reading the books on the third book of the first trilogy, you're not really missing out all that much. While the ending is a bit of a letdown for me personally, the ending is not so bad that I still wouldn't recommend reading the journey from the 3 books. But I ultimately will leave it up to you guys if you guys want to check these books out or not. I'm just warning you guys because it really does kind of turn into a mess after the third book. Next, we're going to go back to Japan for a second and talk about Frieren Beyond Journey's End. This is a really very emotionally charged book, and I love this a lot. I started reading the manga very recently, by the way, on Kindle. It's probably one of the most satisfying fantasy manga out of Japan, and they are making an actual anime adaptation of this in fall. In most fantasy stories where the big hero beats the big bad guy, we never really get to see what happens after the bad guy is beaten. Frieren Beyond Journey's End actually takes us in a really awesome and interesting direction. Fieren's story essentially follows a elf girl named Fearin after her party of adventurers take out the demon lord. Due to the fact that Fearin is essentially ageless, essentially to some degree, she just ages really slowly. She has to deal with the aftermath of the demon lord's defeat, and more or less, she has to see the hero of the world and her friends as she went on the adventure age and eventually die. Time for her is so different than time for us, and there's a lot of themes in here that can really, really hit people that have ADHD or autism hard. For those of you who are not aware, ADHD people like me have a hard time processing time properly. So time for us moves a lot different than a lot of other people, and Fearin shows this very beautifully and depressingly throughout her story. And there's just so many parallels to people with autism and ADHD with this character, and I absolutely fell in love with her and may have teared up a few times already from reading the manga. And the story does a lot of time skips, a lot of time jumps. At one point, she spends 6 months just looking for a flower. And to her, this is nothing, but to everyone around her, it's a lot of time. If you're interested in seeing a fantasy book that deals with the loss of time and the loss of people and the way that this is processed by someone who is neurodivergent, I highly recommend Fearin because of that. If you're someone who has these problems in your life, this book might hit you a little harder than you're expecting. I know if I fucked me up, I'll tell you what. Please check out Fearin in the Kindle manga section and get ready for the anime to come out in fall. Out of all the stories I've talked about up until this point, I highly recommend this one, the Stormlight Archives, the most. I will say right now, it takes a lot more commitment than the other ones because these books are bigger than even the First Law books. These things are giant fat beefy boys, and if you're on Audible, each of the books are somewhere from 40 hours to 50 hours long. So yeah, they're pretty fucking huge. But these also have probably the deepest characters and probably the most mature writing when it comes to mental health. It also has a really badass power system. A lot of these powers and a lot of the fights in the books as well feel very, very anime. If you love anime fight scenes, you're going to love the shit-ass Stormlight Archives, because there's no way the writer was not inspired by anime when he came up with some of these scenes and some of the fights in this book. The powers in this book go anywhere from gravity powers to illusions to being able to warp reality. It's fucking ridiculous! And each of the different characters all deal with some different mental health problem, which, by the way, if you know how much I love Grimgar, you know that I love dealing with protagonists and characters that all have different mental health problems. The main character, Kaladin, deals with a lot of depression, possibly bipolar depression. I can't really tell. I know it's depression, but I'm not sure if it's bipolar depression yet. He also deals with a lot of PTSD from the war. Holy fuck, does he deal with a lot of PTSD. Two secondary protagonists, Shallan and Dalinar, also deal with their own mental health problems. Shallan, I don't want to get too much into because of spoiler reasons, because her mental health problem is a huge plot point that is a surprise, and I don't want to get into it. Let's just say she gets really mentally messed up. But I can talk about Dalinar, though. He is a raging ex-alcoholic who cannot remember his dead wife. He also has a really dark past who, well, quite frankly, people are judging him for that dark past now. He's also running an entire army. All of these characters have to deal with all these different problems in their world while also simultaneously dealing with constant war. A storm that comes across like every month is trying to kill everyone. There's a lot more, but I don't want to go into too many details about the story. It is really, really interesting, and I highly above everything else I've recommended up to this point, I recommend this the most. At least give the first book a try. If you can get past how long the first book is, I understand. It's a very long book. It takes a lot of commitment. But definitely recommend it. It's really good. And the characters have made me cry multiple times in this book. Out of all the books and anime and manga that I have consumed over the years, this book has made me cry the most. You can find, but those are some of the books that I recommend for anybody who is interested in fantasy books. If you have any recommendations, let me know in the comments down below. And I'll see you guys in the next video. Bye!